Reviews. This is my review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 1, Episode 4, Memento Mori. Of course, as usual, there will be a spoiler warning, as if you have not seen this episode, you will be spoiled. I'm doing it this week as a live stream, so if you happen to catch me as I'm doing it live, just know that I will not be interacting with the chat until the end. I'm just going to go through the review as I normally would. I just don't have a ton of time to do a pre-edited video this week. I got a lot of things going on tonight, so I thought I'd just jump on here live and give my review, and hopefully I say the things that I want to say, how I want to say it, without the benefit of editing. So, I want to talk about the title first, Memento Mori. So, this is a Latin phrase meaning remember you must die. So, it's supposed to be a reminder of your mortality. And from my little Google search, it's historically been a skull is a memento mori, like an object that reminds you of your mortality. And a skull is often used for that. And of course, in this episode, I think that comes through most in one of the side plots, in my opinion, with Hemmer, who has the line about purpose in life, which we also saw in the trailer, and we see it in full context here. And Ahura at one point says, "Oh, well, maybe I can't die now because I haven't found my purpose yet." So there's definitely a lot of reminders of mortality and facing death with throughout the episode, and I think that includes our main character this week, Laan Noonien Singh, as well. Now, it's interesting because these titles were released a couple weeks before the season started, the titles of the first 5 episodes anyways. And so I saw this title a few weeks ago, Memento Mori, and I was like, wait, didn't Discovery already do that? Or was it Prodigy? I definitely just saw this title. And turns out it wasn't Discovery, wasn't any Star Trek show. And I was like, but I swear I just watched an episode called this. And you know what it was? It was this other show that I just watched on HBO Max called Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty. So it was about the LA Lakers and their first year in the 1979 to 1980, or Magic Johnson's first year, I should say, 1979 to 1980. It was about that season of basketball. It was a show about basketball. And season 1, episode 6 of that show was called Memento Mori. And so I was like, that is so strange that within 2 months, 2 completely different shows that I watch have the same exact episode title using the same Latin phrase. 2 very different shows. One set in 1979 to 1980 about basketball, and one set in the Star Trek universe in the 23rd century, but both dealing with similar issues. The one episode, it was episode 6 of that season, was about the Lakers coach at the time, Jack McKinney, had just gotten in a bike accident and he was in the hospital, and some of the other characters are kind of dealing with his mortality and their mortality, and so that's kind of where it ties in for that episode. So I just found that really interesting. The 2 completely different shows that I've watched within a month or 2 of each other had the same exact episode title. Now, as for the episode itself, I've gone on about the title long enough. It was phenomenal. Like, Strange New Worlds is just knocking it out of the park. It's just, I don't know that I've ever seen, well, I definitely have never seen the season of Star Trek start off this strongly. And I very rarely see any season of anything start off this strongly. It's impressive. It's really impressive. Now, I have spoken in the past about how Strange New Worlds is able to really capture that authentic feel, that nostalgic feel of the original series, but in a more updated way. And when I've talked about that before, I'm talking more about the aesthetics. I'm talking about the uniforms. I'm talking about the ship, the way the ship feels, the way the ship sounds, the way it looks. Very authentic and yet updated for the year 2022 when the show is actually coming out. So in this case, I think this is the best example of the story being that. The story of the episode feeling really authentic, but in an updated way. So what this really reminded me of was with those classic TOS space battles. Where not even they don't always have to be battles, but those space episodes, space adventures, space dramas, as opposed to what the majority of the original series episodes was, which was Spock Kirk and McCoy beaming down to a planet and meeting some people and blah blah blah. And I never really loved the fact that the top two officers and the chief medical officer always beam down together. Like, why would the chief medical officer need to beam down to like a diplomatic mission or to like all these other weird missions that he beams down to just because they're main characters? It always bothered me. So I always actually preferred their space adventures. So like Doomsday Machine and Corbin Maneuver, even though, that one's a little bit silly at the end. Tholian Web, things like that. So those were always like my preferred style of TOS episode. Um, and this uh, really just did that incredibly well. So it felt like an authentic TOS space episode, but updated for 2022. Also reminded me a lot of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, how the way they use this natural phenomenon, this anomaly, to kind of hide themselves and then have their enemy be in the level playing field as they are. I feel like the Next Generation may have done that before too, but definitely was from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which I love. This episode also kind of drew from. It took elements of the Next Generation episode Disaster and the Deep Space Nine episode Civil Defense, where all the characters are kind of separated. There's some sort of disaster that's happened, and they're separated into different groups. And there's two characters trapped together in a cargo bay, and three characters trapped together in 10 forward, and blah blah blah, and different characters all over the ship. Although really, in this case, it was just the Aurora and Hemmer trapped in the cargo bay thing, which was similar to, I think it was Crusher and LaForge who were trapped in the cargo bay together in the Next Generation episode Disaster. So they had elements of that too, but it just did all of this thing to the next level, just to an amazing level. So all of these elements from previous incarnations of Trek, they just did at a very, very high level. And of course, as usual, they focus on one character. This week it's Leon Noonien Singh, but they are able to still have strong character stories for some of the other characters as well. So that's kind of my overall thoughts. Really phenomenal episode. Let me kind of get into some of the details. We had different storylines. I'll start with my least favorite because I don't have a lot to say about it. It's the thing with Una and sickbay with the Dr. Mabamba and Nurse Chapel, and Una wanting to sacrifice herself. No, don't give me the last plasma. Give it to somebody else. Blah blah blah. That was fine. I just didn't think it was much to it. I felt like it was more like, we really want Una and Dr. Mabamba and Nurse Chapel to be in this episode, so let's just throw this in there. And I'm not saying that's bad or anything. I just think it was the least interesting storyline of anything that we saw. Now let me talk about the Himmer and Uhura thing. Now this, as I said, was reminiscent of like the Next Generation episode Disaster, or honestly, which is reminiscent of many, many disaster movies. So and of course, it's a typical trope, having Uhura trying to impress Hemmer, and Hemmer saying, "You're not going to impress me with theory," and then at the end of it, he's like, "Oh, I'm very impressed." That kind of thing there's nothing new about that. But what's new about this is these particular characters. This is, of course, a new version of Uhura. Now, we did get to see that episode a couple weeks ago that focused on her, but we get a little bit more of her here, and we get a lot more of Hemmer. And we've got that key scene that I mentioned earlier that was also in the trailers, where Hemmer is talking about purpose in life. And you definitely get the sense that Hemmer is just like, if I die, I got my purpose in life. I'm content with dying. And Uhura was like, well, I don't have mine, so I can't die. So maybe that means I won't die. So I don't know. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what in this episode would be considered the Memento Mori, because the Memento Mori would be an object. So maybe getting into Leon's story a little bit later, I think that I can find one, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But I don't see one here in this storyline. However, I do think that conversation just kind of ties into this theme of facing death and being aware of your own mortality, very much so, and just kind of thinking about the fact that have you met your purpose in life yet? Do you know what your purpose in life is? Do you have one? Um, as you're thinking about your own mortality. So that's all very, very interesting. I'll get to Leon in just a second, but gotta talk about Christopher Pike because this was a badass Captain Pike episode. Captain Pike is light years better than Captain Kirk. It almost makes me sad that Uhura and Spock started off with Pike as their captain and have to go to Kirk later on. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of telling us that Kirk was a great captain, but not showing us in the way that we see it here with Pike. I mean, he is faced with all these impossible decisions and makes them. He makes split second decisions, and they are really tough life or death decisions. And you can feel the weight of each decision he makes. He knows it's Federation Remembrance Day or Starfleet Remembrance Day, so he knows the stakes. He feels every death that happens on his ship. Unlike Kirk, who's like, red shirts. Just die. Who cares? Whereas he feels the weight of each death, and that weight affects all of his decisions that he makes, and yet he still makes them decisively. He's an amazing captain. And my favorite line is when Spock is telling him, they're kind of no-win situation that they're in. It's like, well, if we leave this anomaly, the Gorn are going to find us. But if we go further into it, then the ship will be crushed. And Pike goes, "That's a good idea, Spock. Take us closer into the anomaly." And Spock's like, "That is not what I was suggesting." I actually laughed out loud. And then also just goes to show the great dynamics between these characters already. They just have such great chemistry. Like already, it's just so good. So Pike, badass captain. Now we get to Leon. This is about her. And I think the Memento Mori was the thing that she had at the beginning from the pen from the was it a pen from the SS Puget Sound? Shout out to the Pacific Northwest, the Puget Sound. So, and how she was refusing to wear the what do you call it? The Federation Day of Remembrance thing, remembrance. But she was looking at the US the SS Puget Sound thing that she had. I think that's the Memento Mori. I think that is the thing that reminds her of her mortality. And what I loved about the way they handled this story is that I was a little worried that we were going to get into the tropey, overused Moby Dick revenge story where one character is just obsessed with getting revenge and makes irrational decisions and does irrational things, and somebody has to go, hey, calm down. Basically, Picard in Star Trek First Contact, and I maintain to this day that he's out of character in that movie. I don't care what anyone says. He does not act like that. But I was worried we were going to Picard and First Contact, and that is not at all what this was. This was more about Leon facing her trauma and being willing to take on her trauma head on in order to save the ship. I love that, and this is a great character story for her. And I love that we were not beat over the head with her backstory. We got her backstory, but it wasn't like exposition heavy. Like we were able to get it in a way that it just kind of eased out to us, just very smoothly. I really loved how it was disseminated to us. And I've very quickly loved this character. I still wish she had a different last name, but I just absolutely love this character. This is an extremely strong episode for her. And then this is a strong episode for Pike. It's a strong episode for Spock too. Spock's a little understated in this episode, but absolutely strong episode for him as well. And of course, Hemmer. I'm still waiting for the Hemmer episode, but which we're not getting next week. Next week, I think, is the Spock going back to Vulcan episode. I think it's the Spock Amok episode. But we will eventually get a Hemmer episode. I'm still waiting for it, but we definitely get a lot more of him. And he has, of course, that line that I keep mentioning that was from the trailer. And Uhura has a strong episode. We also get a lot of great scenes again with Erica Ortegas. I'm waiting for her episode. I don't know. I feel like that's more of the second season thing. She seems more of a second tier character. I don't know, but um, loving her as well. Just an all around great episode. Um, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this review. Get out of here and got other things to do. Um, but let me first give you my rating out of 10. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I don't I feel weird pulling the trigger in a 10 this early in the series. Like because I feel like this is probably just nothing compared to what it will be. And when I think about the great episodes in Star Trek history, those are usually what the 10s are. And it's hard for me to say that about this one yet. Um, I'm gonna go 9.5. I'm gonna go 9.5. I'm just not ready to pull the trigger on a 10 this early on. Um, 9.5, incredible episode. Fantastic. Love this episode a lot, and I'm loving Strange New Worlds. And I've been, I think, more critical of it than a lot of other people. I think me and Steve Shives, as far as the people that I'm aware of, still love it and say it's great, but aren't saying that it's infallible. Like I gave last week a 7, but I still think overall great start to this season. All right, that does it for my review. Let me do a quick look at the chat. I see Allison Fordyce joining me for the first time in a while. Hey, Allison, where have you been? Come back, join me in some of my other live chats. Great to see you, Allison. Really great to see you. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get going. So please join me again next week. I will probably do a pre-recorded version next week, maybe. I think for my episode 5 review. And please subscribe if you have not already. Smash the like button, do all those great things, and I will see you soon. Goodbye, everyone.